Paivepo. A long time ago in a faraway land, a young woman who had had no prospects for marriage suddenly found herself in a dilemma when she was propositioned by two young men, one wealthy and pompous and promising her a life out of poverty, and the other a quiet and kind-hearted fishmonger who was a foreigner in their kingdom. Vimbai, the young woman, had been orphaned when she was just 13, and when her parents had passed away a week after each other, her father in a boating accident, and her mother in shock of losing her husband during childbirth, giving birth to her last set of twins. As the second eldest in the family, Vimbai and her brother Zivai had become the de facto parents in the household, taking care of their younger siblings, the four sets of twins their parents had left behind. Zivai, as the new head of the family, took the provider route and would go into the forest to hunt and gather fruit, and would also help in the little plot of land where they cultivated rapoko and maize and groundnuts and groundnuts. Vimbai, however, was responsible for the household and for ensuring that everyone washed, ate, was well behaved, and was within the vicinity of their compound at all times. She knew how important it was to keep a tight leash with the younger kids, because once, in the early days of de facto parenting, the kids had wandered out of their homesteads too many times and would go and beg in other people's homes. They grew such a reputation for begging that people would shoo them out of their gates saying, "We are also poor, we can't be feeding you every day. Go back to your home, go back to your house." And when Vimbai had heard of it, she had made all the children swear that they would not wander into people's homes, and kept a constant watch on their whereabouts, and broke down meal times so that they would get to eat smaller portions at more intervals, and thus provide a false sense of plenty of food and thus fullness in them. Soon enough, she and the rest of the family had created a rooster that they used around the house. As she did her chores around the homestead, Vimbai would ask the older siblings to help her with washing, cooking, and cleaning. And always, one twin would be secured tightly across her back, and another sibling would carry the other baby twin. Now, as she walked with the youngest twin and perused the foodstuffs in the market, she could not help but sigh with tiredness. It had been over 10 years since their parents had passed, and yes, things had gotten better. Her brother Sivai had not just become an advisor in the king's council, but he had married too. And yet, it had been his role in the kingdom that had turned their fortunes. They no longer needed to work too hard or count the grain they put into the pot, and they could also afford to eat at any time during the day. Even the appearance of their homestead had changed and was no longer as drab and as depressing as it had been before. But what had made her tired was the marriage of the oldest twins that had taken place the previous day. She had beamed with pride when the delegation of their husbands, who incidentally were twins too, had arrived, heading cows into their homestead, and as the Aurora negotiations began. Everyone had extolled her, Vimbai, for raising the girls well, for they were respectful, sturdy, hard-working, and their reputation was extolled as exemplary across the kingdom. "You did well in raising the children," the husband's negotiators had said. "There is not a hint of self-pity or of entitlement with them. You would swear they were raised by both parents. Well done." And Vimbai's face had brightened even further. But then the inevitable question had also come. "And what about you?" they asked. "When will you marry?" Vimbai had blushed even though the question hurt. She had no response. She never saw anyone, and none of the boys ever saw her, cooped up in the house as she always was. There were no prospects for her, not even tentative arrangements between her family and another family for a marriage proposal, because she had no parents. Otherwise, who would arrange that marriage for her? So she had shaken her head and laughed, her mirth fake and insincere. Soon, she said with a finality in her voice that did not brook any further questions. But that afternoon, as she walked into the market, little did she know that the soon would come earlier, as she would meet not just one, but two potential suitors. She saw the first young man standing beside his fish stall when her little sister nudged her excitedly with her fingers, disturbing her out of her reverie and saying, "Sissy Vimbai, Sissy Vimbai, there is some fish there. Look." Vimbai smiled at the young girl, who was now almost as tall as she was, and followed the direction of the fingers. A handsome young man was standing beside the stall and speaking to an elderly woman. As Vimbai and her sister got closer to the stall, they could hear the older woman speak. "These peanuts are all I have, my child," she was saying. "Give me the smallest of your fish, just so I can revive the taste in my toothless mouth again." But the young man was finishing wrapping up the largest fish, and with a big smile on his face he was insisting, "No, Mbuya, take it all. I can always catch a bigger one tomorrow, but today, go and enjoy this one." The two haggled for a while, the older woman refusing and the younger man insisting, until at last the older woman sighed and outstretched her hand to receive the bigger fish, simultaneously handing him a small bag of peanuts. They all watched the woman pack the fish in a basket before thanking the young man again and ambling away on a walking stick. At that moment, the young man turned to look at his next customers, and as his eyes met Vimbai's, a zing of electric current rushed through her body, and she wanted to shiver despite the sweltering afternoon heat. He was so handsome, Vimbai quickly deduced, but what was captivating her about him was the easy smile that sat on his lips and the kindest eyes she had ever seen. "Hi," the young man said and continued with his easy smile. "Welcome to Wanai's fishing store. What can I help you with today?" Vimbai turned to look at the fish close up for the first time, and involuntarily her stomach ricocheted, and she clutched her mouth and ran to the outside of the market, where she retched. It took her a while to realize that both the store owner and her younger sister had followed her and were looking at her in concern. "Sissy Vimbai," her younger sister Chido was saying, "I am sorry. I should have known. It's been so long that I had thought by now the sight or smell of fish would not affect you." Vimbai was nodding, but in her mind, she was trying to clear her thoughts from the sight of fish that remained lodged there. She accepted a gulp of water from the store owner and drank as much as she could until her stomach settled. "What is wrong?" the store owner Wanai asked as she returned the gold. "I'm sorry," Vimbai said. "I did not mean to offend you by vomiting. It's just that I am not a fish person, and seeing them all spread out made my stomach churn." "You don't have to apologize," the young, kind-eyed man said. "I know fish is not for everyone. But please, tell me you are feeling better now." Vimbai stilled herself and waited, then realized that the nausea had gone. She nodded, but remembered where her aversion to fish had come from. Her father had been a fisherman, and she had loved the catch that he had brought with him in the mornings from fishing expeditions. But when he had drowned in a boating accident while fishing on a stormy night, she had never been able to stomach the little creatures again. Because whenever she had seen them, she had been reminded of her father. But now, she had promised the younger children that they would buy them some fish if they were well behaved during the raw order, and she had felt an obligation to fulfill that promise. Vimbai righted herself and took deep gulps of air before she said to the young man, "I am fine. Fish just makes me..." She swallowed, then continued, "Please, give my little sister some fish. She will do the trading with you." The young man nodded and went to wrap a large fish for Chido, which he then placed in a basket. He then washed his hands in a bucket and returned to Vimbai. "Are you sure you are okay now?" he asked, and she nodded. "Okay. Will you be able to get home alone? Vimbai nodded and he asked softly again, Where is home? Perhaps I can accompany you to make sure that you get there safely. Before Vimbai could protest, Chido had already belted out the directions to their riverside home, but Vimbai protested against being accompanied by him, insisting, Take care of your stall, we shall be all right. And the young man, Wanai, let her and her sister go. He watched them mingle into the bustling crowd and disappear from his sight before he had the strength to go back to his stall. A part of his heart fluttered with excitement. What a beautiful, humble soul the girl was, he thought to himself, and he thought how he wanted to see her again. He was tempted to miss his past life again. Had he been in his father's courtyard, he would have summoned an aide to help in catching her unawares and then bring the girl to him. It had been a fruitful option before he had fallen out of favor with his father, and his father had banished him to another kingdom to learn Hunu and regain his dignity. And what a journey in learning it had been, and what he had learned and unlearned in all that period. He knew now that he would never approach the girl in the same manner as he had previously, for he was now a changed man, a grown man. He knew he wanted to see her again, and he knew exactly what he had to do. Meanwhile, as Chido and Vimbai left the bustle of the market and took the path that would lead them directly to their home, Vimbai bumped into her next suitor. She was carrying a basket of food on her head and a roadrunner fowl under one arm, and likewise, Chido carried her small basket on her head. Just outside the market in the village square, they saw a small crowd gathered around a young man who seemed to be speaking, and the excited crowd was jostling to get closer to the speaker. Curiosity gripped Vimbai and Chido, and they walked closer, Vimbai craning her laden neck to see better, while Chido was nudging her excitedly with her fingers, asking, What is it, Sissy Vimbai? What is it? Shh, Vimbai said, as she caught a better glimpse of a young handsome man wearing lavish cloth and with jewelry on his neck and wrists. Let's hear what he's saying. I am Shumba, the young man was saying, his voice carrying both pride and pomposity. I am the lion, and we the lions are the hunters, and whatever we see is prey to us. But we have amassed so much, too much wealth, that my family's feet thunder as they walk, and their girth demands space to move. We cannot possibly finish all this wealth alone, which is why I have decided to share some of this wealth with you, the poor. Now, anybody here to tell me why I should give them a bag of grain? He lifted a sack of maize and looked into the crowd where many hands had shot up and people were crying, Me! Me, me. He pointed at an elderly woman in the crowd. Yes, Mbuya, come here and tell the crowd, why should I give you this grain? The elderly woman ambled forward, and then, in the saddest and most pitiful voice, she told Shumba and the rest of the crowd her story. The ancestors were kind to me and gave me a fertile womb. I had 10 children, she said, raising all 10 fingers, 7 sons and 3 daughters. But then the soil opened up for all the boys. I would raise them and feed them, but once they grew old enough to go into the world and fend themselves, the Grim Reaper would visit and take them into his evil claws. Year after year, I buried my sons, all 7 of them, and by then my womb was too dry to accept my husband's seed. And then, as if that had not been enough, the Grim Reaper took my husband. My daughters grew too, but they attracted men from kingdoms too far from here, and they went and married, and all I hear of them is sometimes a message from a passerby or an oracle from the Nganga. I am all alone now, Shumba. I have no children, no grandchildren. My homestead has become too big and too empty for me. The roofs to my heart leak, and I do not have the strength to thatch them. The land I can till is now small. Oh, thanks to my gnawed knuckles and back, I have nothing, I have nobody. Your kindness, say, will thus allow this old woman to have some more meals as she waits for the grim reaper and his sickle to visit her. The old woman stopped and stooped into her cane again. Shumba then spoke and said, Ah, Mbuya, your story has touched me because I too grew up in abject poverty. I know what it is to have no idea where the next meal is going to come from, and I know the pain of hunger. Had I not decided to stand strong for my family, we would all have perished. Had it not been for me, the Shumba Nam would be dead. So I hear you, Mbuya, and I heard your story. He then turned to the crowd and then asked the people, You have all heard Mbuya's story. Should I give ye this maize, or is there anyone else who thinks they deserve this bag of grain better? Hands shot up into the air and cries of, Me, 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 arose again. The young man searched in the crowd for another hand and then pointed at a man with one arm. Yes, he said, you say, come on up here and tell us why you deserve the benevolence of the Shumba family. The one-armed man stood and spoke about how his hand had been wrenched off by a crocodile that had attacked their little village by the river. After I lost my hand, the man finished, I lost all access to my livelihood. I could no longer fend for my family, and my wife has become the sole provider. If you allow me this bag of grain, sir, then my wife will welcome me home with a smile on her face for the first time in a long time. There were hours and hours of collective sadness, and Shumba looked at both the old woman and the one-armed man as though deep in thought. Then he laughed loudly and said, Well, 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 if it is not a lucky day for the both of you, for there are 2 bags of grain here, one for each of you. 2 aides handed the beneficiaries grain amidst the shouts of Shumba, Shumba, Shumba in the crowd. But as Shumba surveyed the chanting crowd while beaming with pride, he felt his eyes drawn to the most beautiful creation he had ever seen, and involuntarily his body reacted to the sight of him. She was beautiful, a quite unassuming beauty that was calming like the breeze on a humid day. She held her head up high, and in her face and posture he could see the fierce clash of poverty and pride. And he also knew that if he did not stop her now, he would never find her again. So he had to stop her now. Vimbai was about to leave and had already turned her leg when she felt an intense gaze upon her. She shivered slightly, and unbidden, her eyes turned to follow the direction of the gaze, and in that instant, her eyes locked with Shumba's. She had never felt anyone look at her like that before, and she knew instinctively what the gaze meant. The young man liked her, and he wanted her. She did not want to wait for him. She did not want the attention. She did not want the complication of being wooed by a man, and she knew she had to disappear from the crowd as fast as was humanly possible. Let's go, Chido, she was saying to her younger sister. It's getting late, and we need to be starting the evening meal. Come. And with a brisk pace, the 2 of them set off home with Chipo panting beside her. But they had not walked too far when their journey was interrupted by 2 bulky men. Please wait, the men who looked like aides said, stalling Vimbai and Chido on the road. Our boss would like to have a word with you. Being a person of very few words, Vimbai only tried to sidestep them, but the bulk of the men on the narrow path was a solid wall, and they would not move. Shumba did not take long to arrive, walking lazily as though he owned the world. In his hand, he held a pure gold cane with a lion head, and jewelry clinked on his wrist and neck. It was this clinking jewelry that made Vimbai and Chido turn to look, and there he was, almost upon them, smiling like a man with a prize. Oh, beautiful lady, he said, looking directly into Vimbai's eyes, that Vimbai felt a zing and quickly looked away. But he continued speaking. "O you who glows brighter and more radiant than the sun, with eyes that shine on pathways and skin that glisten as if it's made of gold. Why do you carry a burden so heavy for you? Come, let me help you lighten your load for you." He reached for the basket atop her head and the parcels she carried in her hands and handed them to one of the aides. "Carry this to your home," he told the aides. "Let the young lass," he nodded at Chido, who was eyeing the lion head at the head of the cane and which looked realistic. "Let the young lady here show you the way to their home. Come, beautiful lady," he said as the aides and Chido disappeared over a bend in the path. "The thief of hearts, let me accompany you on your way home." Along the path they walked, and all the way he would not stop speaking. "You should be arrested, lady," he was saying, "because the moment I saw you, my heart stopped beating and I knew it had been you. I have to call the king's guard to search you, search for the heart you've stolen and find it in this beautiful essence of yours. Oh, what a glorious day handed to me by my ancestors. I wake up to give, and yet I am giving you an angel, just as a token of appreciation for giving the poor. Oh, tell me, girl, are you real? Or shall you vanish if I close my eyes? Because if you will vanish, I want to spend the rest of my life with them open, simply looking at you and breathing in your presence and reveling in your light aura. Oh, beautiful girl, you have stolen my heart. Please allow me now to steal yours too." Vimbai, who had been quiet the whole time, was dizzy with an adulation she had never received, and she found herself blushing severely. They had gotten to the fringes of her home, and again Shumba told her, "What do you say, beautiful lady? Are you willing to be mine?" Because she had never been wooed, Vimbai did not know what to say. She did not know whether it was appropriate to say no now, or if she said no, whether the young man would disappear forever. As she mused in her mind what to say next, Shumba continued, his eyes taking a sweeping look over her homestead. "Look, if you say yes, I will take you out of this squalor. I will lead you into a future where you will lack nothing. You will be the wife of a big crow owner, and you will lift your family out of this poverty," he finished, taking another slightly condescending look over their homestead. Vimbai flinched inwardly as the words were a stark reminder of who she was and where she had come from. She remembered the responsibility that sat upon her shoulders and sighed, then said to the expectant Shumba, "No, I am sorry, sir. I am afraid I cannot be yours." And gathering her skirts, she rushed into her homestead, leaving Shumba with his mouth wide open. Shumba stood for a long while, watching the young woman disappear into her heart, and he could not help the smile that had spread across his lips. What fortune it was for him to meet this beautiful woman at the exact juncture in his life when fortunes had turned for him and his family. He shuddered as he turned to go home, remembering how at one point the squalor he had seen the girl disappearing into had been his and his family's life, only that they lived in squalor in the affluent parts of the kingdom, and his family had taken debt upon debt to hide that they were now poor. His family had always been poor for as long as he could remember, but according to his father, things had not always been like that for them. His father had told him that their family came from a long line of miners. As such, they had become treasures to the kingdom, and successive kings had drawn them closer because of their tribute-paying capabilities. But somehow, Shumba's father had failed in the gold hunt. No matter what hole he dug, there was no ore belt, and to sustain his family, he had begun to sell the bars that had been left by his forefathers, bit by bit, hoping his luck would change, but the luck had never changed. Shumba's mother, who had been a distant royal relative and had grown up in wealth, failed to find sustenance in her husband's home. But not wanting the shame of marrying beneath her to follow her, she had gone to skin tanners and cloth merchants to help clothe their family, promising the sellers she would repay the debts. She had gone to potters and chosen the best intricate pots for her kitchen so she could show these off to her friends. She had had the hearts in her homestead painted and adorned beautifully from the outside so that passers-by would gawk and exclaim that this was the best house in the kingdom. But all this had come at a cost. Debtors began to line up the yard, demanding payment and threatening to take a cow or a goat or a fowl. And realizing that their debts would not be paid, they eventually did just that. Until all the crows and pens were empty, and Shumba's father had to borrow his friend's livestock to hide the lack that had befallen the homestead. But the greater cost had been for the family and for the children who had the best clothes but empty stomachs. When they had meals, it was usually a plate of sadza next to a mound of salt. Otherwise, they survived on the wild fruits that they picked surreptitiously because they could not afford to buy those from the gatherers. And word of their deaths had spread across the kingdom that wherever they went, whispers followed them. And the friendships Shumba had made as a boy were fickle, as they were all based on family name, and he also could not invite any of his friends home. His gang of friends were feared in the kingdom, and they walked around the communities looking for weaker kids to pick on. But in the moment where there was no one to bully, he became the bullied. So it had always been up to him to find someone who could be picked on, or else the Lord's would be on him. The poverty had spared Shumba once he came of age to follow his father on his many futile mining attempts. His father had patiently taught him everything, from surveying a piece of land for potential gold, to digging the ground at the right angle, and to distinguishing ordinary rock from gold or rock. After these lessons, his father had retired, saying, "The ancestors have not blessed me on this journey, but perhaps you might find fortune and return us to our former glory." And as though his father had known, the young man had struck gold on his first attempt alone, and for the first time in many years, their domestic smelter was lit, and the family watched in wonder as small balls of gold were formed, then spat into existence. And like the previous years had never happened, their lives changed. And now, with the visible wealth in the family, there was no shortage of suitors for him, and every other day his mother would be telling him why Soko's daughter or Gumbo's daughter would be a good fit for the family. They now had cows with which to marry with, so everyone wanted a share. But he had liked none of the girls that they had brought before him, simply because of the way they had fawned over him now, something they had not done before. But this girl, he thought to himself as he walked home with his aides, this is who he wanted. A simple girl from a simple life and with no major expectations from him or from his family. He knew he would be back tomorrow to woo her again. He would bring gifts this time, a golden bracelet, some earrings or nose rings, or perhaps even a necklace, something that would remind her of him and perhaps help him in expediting their relationship. Vimbai, however, had rushed into her heart and, still blushing, pondered on the events of the afternoon. She had always seen the other girls being courted, and never, not once, had she imagined that some day a man would be interested in her too. She looked at herself in the mirror appraisingly. What had it been that the boy had seen as beautiful here? She wondered. These thoughts continued to nag at her as she prepared a fire as far away from the kitchen where her siblings were cooking their fish as possible. She would have her own meal alone, she was thinking to herself, blowing the flame over the fire. But no sooner had she placed her pot over the fire had she seen Chido run towards her, calling, "Sissy Vimbai, Sissy Vimbai, you have a visitor." Vimbai frowned and asked, "Who?" "That boy," Chido said, "the boy we saw earlier today." Thinking it was Shumba, Vimbai quickly dusted her skirts and touched her head to make sure that the bun on her head was intact. Then, "Let's go," she said, and followed Shido, who was keeping merrily away. Vimbai's heart sank a little when she realized it was not Shumba, and a second later recognized the kind-hearted fishmonger from the market. Smiling uncertainly and wondering how he had known where she stayed, she said, "Hi and welcome." The young man nodded, then said, "Please forgive my intrusion. I just wanted to check how you were feeling after the nausea earlier." Vimbai laughed softly. "Oh, that," she said. "It is past. I am feeling okay, feeling normal now." Wanai smiled and Vimbai remembered the kind-hearted smile she had seen earlier. But the young man was reaching into his bag that he slung over his shoulder, and from it he extracted a small vial of potions. "Here," he said, thrusting the bottle towards Vimbai. "The herb doctor in the market said it will help with the vomiting." "Thank you," Vimbai said, floored by the thoughtfulness. But at that moment, Shido and her twin brother came running to them. "Sissy Vimbai," the young boy said, "we have finished scaling the fish. How do we cook the fish now?" "Have you cut it into pieces?" Vimbai asked, and both children shook their heads. "Well, have Tsungai cut it out and tell her to pour a little oil into the hajgana, and when the oil is slightly hot, she can begin searing the meat." The two kids nodded and were about to speed off when Wanai said quietly and gently to them, "Do you want me to help you? I can cook a mean fish dish." They looked at Wanai appraisingly and then giggled. "I have never seen a boy cook," Shido said. Well, Wanai said, "Come and let me show you what these hands can make." He looked over at Vimbai and she nodded, although her eyebrow was raised. From her fire at the other end of their homestead, she watched Wanai work his magic with the children, and she could hear their raucous laughter after he said something. She watched them sit in silence in some moments, staring at him raptly, and she knew that he was probably a good storyteller, because there was no way her little brother Tunga ever sat through anything. The sun was setting when Vimbai dished up for herself and began eating, her mind wearing from all that had taken place during the day. She was feeling tingly and exhilarated, as though she had finished weaving an intricate basket. Was this how it felt to be wanted, to be desired? Is that what all those other girls who had been courted and married felt? She ignored the hubbub of her siblings and the fishmonger as they chatted in the distance, and allowed herself to revel in these happy feelings. She was roused from her musings when Kuda, her 15-year-old brother, came running and said, "Sissy Vimbai, Wanai has said that he is going to the river to fish. Can I go with him?" Vimbai looked at the boy who was becoming a young man whom she had raised since he was 4, and a pang ran through her, and she shuddered, remembering. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the fear that had gripped her. "No, Kuda, you can't go to the river. Remember our father?" The young man's face had fallen, but he looked at his sister defiantly. "I am going, Sis Vimbai," he said. "I know what happened to our father, but I will be careful. I am a man now, and I have to learn a trade so I can take care of my family in the future." "What about hunting?" Vimbai said. "Tanning, blacksmithing, farming, aren't all those reasonable trades, and haven't I made sure you learned all of them?" The young man crossed his arms across his chest. "I want to go to the river, and whether you like it or not, Sister Vimbai, I am going." Vimbai looked at him, realizing how indeed the boy was growing and was learning how to take up his pace. Still, she wanted to protect, because he was still her child, the child she had raised, and she wanted to protect him still. to keep him away from the vagaries of life. She opened her mouth, but before she could say a thing, a shadow fell over her and she looked up. It was Wanai. She turned her frustration to him. "How dare you?" she asked him. "How dare you come into our home and convince my brother that it is a good idea to go to the river? How dare you tell him that it's okay for him to risk his life so? Huh? You don't even know us, and yet you already have come to our home to cause havoc. Who are you, and how dare you?" Wanai crouched his broad frame, and his face came level with Vimbai's, and again she was jolted by the kindness in his eyes. "Vimbai," he said, "I learned from your brother how you lost your father, and I am sorry for the tragedy that you have experienced. I am sorry for your loss." Vimbai took a deep breath and said a feeble, "Thank you. I understand how hard it must be for you to comprehend that your brother may go back to the river again." He continued, and Vimbai nodded. "But," he said, "in my culture, a profession is passed from one generation to the next. Children become custodians to their family's gift. I believe your family was a fishing family, and I know that, try as you might to dissuade your brother, if he is called by the forefathers to follow his gift, then you will have to let him go. Otherwise, trouble might follow him in whatever occupation he undertakes. Vimbai, your brother may go to the river without you knowing and endanger his life. If, however, you let me go with him, I will teach him all the ways of the water, and the risk will decrease." But fear and uncertainty danced in Vimbai's eyes. She looked over at her brother, who was fidgeting on one foot and then the other, his expression hopeful and expectant. "The river is calm today," Wanai said convincingly, "and we won't get into the canoe. We will fish by the side of the river." "Please," Kuda said. Though Vimbai was torn, she knew that Wanai was right. If Kuda wanted to fish, then he would eventually find his way to the river anyway. So imperceptibly she nodded. "Please get back before it's too late." She watched the glee on the boy's face and watched as Menta and Minty walked briskly towards the gate, then disappeared. And Kuda was ordained that night, for he caught a huge haul that solidified him as a fisherman, and as he sold his catch in the marketplace the following day, people commented on his uncanny resemblance to his father. Vimbai saw a whole lot of Wanai after that, as he came to their home every second night to take Kuda fishing with him. And always he would tease her when he arrived. "You are always working," he would say, after finding her watering their vegetable garden, or clearing away soot from a fire, or cleaning the earthenware pots with scent. "Do you save all your hard work for when I visit?" And Vimbai would laugh, and whenever he was early, she would allow the young man to help her draw water from the well outside their home, and they would water the garden together. He had surprised everyone too by being handsy with the pot. One afternoon, he had arrived to find Vimbai plucking a roadrunner for their evening meal. "I hope you're not cooking it the usual boring way everyone in your kingdom does," he said. "And what boring way is that?" she had asked. "Boiling it lightly and then frying it?" He responded. She had laughed. "Is there any other way to prepare it?" "Let me show you." Vimbai had excused herself, waiting to laugh at his attempt. And yet, everyone had watched with amazement as he chopped vegetables and placed them into the pot where the chicken was boiling, and lightly stirred the pot every now and again. The kids giggled behind their heads and said, "Look, a man is cooking," and they went to call their friends from the neighbors to watch the spectacle of a man sitting beside a fire and stirring a pot. But when after he had gone to the river with Kuda and they had cooked their sada and sat down to eat it with the relish they had prepared, they had not stopped licking their fingers, and they had chewed the bones until they were mush, and declared, "This is the best meal we have ever eaten, ever." Vimbai had to hide Kuda's share for when he came back, knowing that the others would chomp on it too. And Wanai too became popular amongst the siblings, always pulling out a little treat for them, a toy artifact, a nibble of a delicacy, or a well-preserved honeycomb, and giving them little puzzles and riddles to solve, with the winner getting a prize. Vimbai would watch her little brothers and sisters beam around him as they jostled for his attention, and she knew that he had stolen their hearts, just as he had Kudas, who would be waiting for him impatiently towards sunset so they would go to the river. Vimbai found herself beginning to look forward to Wanai's visits and to the lightness he carried with him, and that filled the whole homestead, making everyone at ease around him. He was so soft, an antithesis of what she had grown up believing what men should be like. His voice was calm and even-toned, that several times she had had to wonder what he sounded like when he was angry or excited. He was patient too, and when he began to teach some of the siblings the art of building fishing nets, he did so with so much calmness, allowing them to make mistakes which he patiently corrected, and encouraging them daily until the net was finished before he went to sell it for them to the fishermen in his stall. He was also teachable and very open to learning, and he would often ask Vimbai questions about the kingdom. I have heard that your kingdom is a week-long rain-making ceremony. How do you guys do it? And Vimbai had laughed. Why don't you ask your friends in the market or by the river? And he had said, they won't say, they just laugh like you are doing. Yet I am genuinely interested, because your kingdom is better rain than us. When I do go back home, I will know something that will help us better. And so Vimbai had taught him. He asked two of the herbs and plants they used in healing, telling Vimbai, please remind me to take this root or that flower back home when I leave. It will surely help my people. He was curious too of the trade patterns in the kingdom. I always see merchants by the river, he would say, and how the kingdom is prospering because of that. You know, this river winds through our kingdom, and yet we do not use it to trade as much as you do. Perhaps I will be able to give pointers to our advisory council so that they too can harness the power of that river. Tell me about your kingdom, Vimbai asked him one day, her interest genuine. I have never set foot outside this kingdom, and it will be interesting to learn what other people do and how they do it. And Wanai indulged them. What about your king, your queen, the royal family? What are they like? The king has 19 daughters and 4 wives, Wanai told her, and try as he might, he could not get a son, until one final last chance. His eldest wife gave him the boy child that he wanted, but the boy grew up lavished upon and spoiled, so spoiled that he did the most ridiculous things. He would trespass and enter sacred places in the kingdom, violating all cultural boundaries. He would release all the livestock from people's crows at night, and watch with glee as people attempted to round their animals up. He would interrupt people as they worked in the fields, shouting, thief, 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 and people would drop their tools to chase an invisible assailant, only to learn later that it had been a prank by the prince, and yet a day would have been wasted in the field. So people went to the now old king and complained, if you don't rein in your son, then there will be rebellion in this kingdom should you pass and should he become your successor. So the king tried to discipline the prince to no avail. The boy just could not learn. So did the boy become king? Vimbai asked. No, the king is still alive to the best of my knowledge, Wanai responded. But I learned to send the boy to a disciplined school. I don't know how the boy is faring. Vimbai laughed. At least he had his fun as a boy. She had watched him as he spoke and found herself going tingly again. He was a handsome man, what with his high cheekbones and his expressive and intelligent brown eyes. His skin was smooth and with a dark, rich tone, and he sat, stood, and walked with an upright posture that showed his confidence and vitality. Why is he always here, though, she wondered. Why does he keep coming back? By now, he should have worked up a system of meeting up with Kuda, and there would be no need for him to come all the way to the homestead. Yet, still he came to their home and spent time with Vimbai and the siblings, and in all that time he would be jovial, giving the home a facelift of joy. Vimbai learned the true intent of his visits one afternoon when he arrived with a heavy downpour in his wake. They had sat in their kitchen, which had a leak, as they watched the hole in the roof grow bigger and bigger with more rain. And when at last the rain had stopped, Wanai had rushed to fetch thatches from their shed and quickly fixed the roof while Vimbai cleaned the floor. And as soon as he was done, the downpour started again, and heavier this time. They watched in relief as not a drop of water dripped onto the floor, and Wanai and Vimbai gave each other a high five. But Vimbai was immediately pensive as she went to stand by the window. "I am afraid Kuda will not go with you tonight," she said. "The river will be too swollen for my comfort." Wanai nodded and responded, "Of course, I understand. I too would not want to risk my life in the river, not before I marry the most beautiful girl in the world." He looked at her slyly and she blushed. That night the downpour did not ease, and Vimbai was only thankful that the siblings had retired to their huts shortly after they had eaten. Only she and Wanai, who could not walk out in the heavy downpour, remained in the kitchen, sharing hot cups of Zumbani tea over the fire, and speaking of all and everything as they listened to the raindrops pounding the earth. And as the night wore on, Vimbai found that she and Wanai were sitting as close as modesty allowed, yet she was too tired to move as she felt safe beside him. And as they shared one anecdote over another, Vimbai found it difficult to look over at him as his eyes were fixated on her face, and any glance towards him made their eyes meet. But sometime in the night, as the rain lessened and the world became calm again, Vimbai allowed him to take her hands in his and gathered enough courage to look into his eyes as he spoke. "For the longest time," he said, "since the first time I met you in the market, I have been enamored by you, by your grace, your humility, your overprotectiveness over your siblings, your beauty, and deep in my heart I have fallen for you." He was quiet for a while, then finished. "I love you, Vimbai. Please, be mine. Please marry me. Allow me to take you back to my home, my people, so that you can be one with them." There was so much sincerity in his eyes and in his posture that Vimbai almost shouted, "Yes, I will marry you." But she also knew how impossible it was for them. She sighed and gently extricated her hand from his and stood and went to lean by a wall. From that position, she said, "It can't." And before you could ask why, she continued, "The children, I can't leave them. Your profession, I could never live with it." Again he opened his mouth to say something, but she was quicker. "I am sorry, Wanai. Please don't push it." He didn't, and when later he let himself into the drizzle to go back to his home, Vimbai had sunk to the floor and hugged her knees while looking thoughtfully into the fire. She could not help but let a tear escape her eye. She would never be able to move anywhere with the responsibility she carried. She knew that the stirrings in her heart for Wanai had to be true, but practicality told her that it was impossible. Perhaps it would be wise to choose Shumba, whose declarations of love and forever continued to plague her. Shumba was a periodical visitor to her home, seeing as he spent the majority of his time in the mines. But the few times he visited, he did so with so much grandeur and pomposity that his arrivals became a source of mimics and hilarity from the children in the community. Vimbai had learnt that she would hear him while he was still far, as the bells on his donkey and his 8 donkeys would jingle and thus announce his presence. Then at the homestead entrance, he would jump off his donkey, hand the reins to an aide, and then with a flourish of his colorful robes, he would step into the homestead. By then, all the neighbors and the children would have gathered to watch, and oftentimes he would stand by the gate and loudly instruct the aides. Give everyone a bag of grain. Make sure no one starves while I am alive, while I am here. And then, into Vimbai's family's homestead, he would instruct aides to bring in grains, meats, and skins. It's too much, Vimbai would protest at his extravagance. There is no way we can finish all this. Please take some with you home. But he would laugh, the loud, boisterous laugh of the wealthy that reverberated across the neighborhood. There is nothing that is too much when we see a woman as beautiful as you. You deserve the very best, beautiful you, and with me by your side, you shall never have to work a day in your life again. She knew that no matter how hard she protested, he would only laugh and do nothing about it. And yet, while his generosity was not a bad thing, there was something about it that grated on her nerves. It made their semi-poverty amplified. It made it seem like they could not take care of themselves. She remembered the first time he had come to her home after their initial meeting. He had gifted her with an exquisite gold necklace that looked delicate at the touch and yet was heavy in her hands. She had allowed him to clasp the jewelry around her neck, wanting to feel like a princess for a moment. But the moment it rested at the base of her chest, the enchantment was broken, and she had said, "Thank you, but please take it off." He had been insistent. "Please keep this. I had it made specifically for you as its beauty matches your beauty." Look, he shoved a small mirror that had magically come out of his many folds of clothing. Look how the gold lights up your eyes, making you even more beautiful, my beauty. She had smiled and conceded. Yes, it is beautiful, but you know our culture, Shumba. No unmarried woman can receive a gift from a man. If you want to give this to me, then you have to come through my family. Okay then, he said, helping her unclasp the intricacy. I will give it to your brother. No, she cried, not before I agree to be yours. For now, it cannot happen. Agree then, he had said, and she shook her head. He said, look, I have the ability to take you out of this drab community and show you how us the affluent live. You will not have to do any housework, no working with choking smoke or carrying drums of water on your head. I will employ maids to cook for you, to clean for you. You will eat the same dishes as the king. Your life will change from this. He swept his hand across the homestead, his nose crunched lightly in disdain. What more can a woman want? I want to think about it, she said quietly. Please, give me time to think. He had nodded, but it had also not stopped him from bringing her the most expensive pieces of jewelry he made at the goldsmith's for her every time he stopped by. By the time you give me permission to visit your brother, he said finally, I will have a trove of treasures for you. Just watch. Now, with each subsequent visit, she was growing uncomfortable of his presence because it was a visible presence, and soon everyone in the community knew of him. People whom Vimbai had never talked to since her mother's passing had started to visit their homestead and would ask, what did you give him to make him fall for a poor girl from a community like ours so? What potion did you use? Nothing, she would respond, resenting the intrusions. What's stopping you from marrying him already? They asked. Huh? Is it the omen of poverty that is following you? Huh? girl, wake up. The ancestors do not bless us twice. Take that man. The unmarried girls would also say, if you do not want that handsome rich man, give him to us, and we can show him a good time. Vimbai knew that it would be foolish to tell anyone that she did not like the young man at all, that there was nothing about him that drew her closer to him. He had never made an effort to know what she liked or disliked. She found it difficult to smile whenever he was around, let alone laugh. In fact, he made her nervous and fidgety, and always she became self-conscious in his presence. He also never cared for his siblings, only giving them expensive gifts when he arrived, then otherwise ignoring them as though they were not around. Oftentimes, she wondered whether he saw her beyond the beauty he envisioned, and if she was a person to him, or just another pretty face. And she thought too of what would happen should he meet someone more beautiful than her. Was she being foolish in rejecting him? The answer to a rhetorical question came the afternoon after Wanai's declaration of love, when your brother Vimbai visited. I hear you have a suitor, he said jokingly as they sat in the kitchen, and after Vimbai had asked the younger siblings to excuse them. Vimbai just rolled her eyes and her brother laughed and said, "What? You don't like him?" She sighed. "I don't know, brother. I just don't know." It was Vivai's turn to sigh. "Well, the gentleman visited me yesterday with 1,000,000 gifts. He said he had come to talk to me about asking for your hand in marriage." When Vimbai did not say anything, he asked, "What do you say about that?" "I don't feel anything for him," Vimbai said finally. "Yet I know also that time is running away, and I might not have another chance to find a suitor. Brother, what do I do? People are saying I am foolish for not choosing a wealthy man, yet I don't love him at all." Vimbai took his sister's hands in his and smiled, remembering the beauty of his love match and the glorious marriage he now had. "My sister, follow your heart. You have spent all your youth pouring into others' cups. It may be time for you to have your cup poured into, and if it's love you want, then you have every right to refuse him, because I promise you, without feeling anything for the man, you will end up resenting him, and marriage is forever. That resentment will be forever too." She nodded, then looking into her brother's eyes, she asked, "Brother, can I tell you something too?" Vimbai nodded, and Vimbai proceeded to tell him about Wanai. She saw him flinch when she said he was a fishmonger and a fisherman. She saw how his face turned even tenser with the news that he was a foreigner. "But Vimbai," Vimbai said, "you know what we say in our culture? Marry your neighbors. We don't know this man. Why is this foreigner here? Who is to say he did not run away from a crime he committed in his hometown, or that he was punished for one reason or another? We don't know this man or his family, Vimbai." Vimbai nodded, but just as she was about to speak, there was a knock on the door and she shouted, "Come in." To her shock, it was Wanai, and he was looking at the two of them sitting so close together. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude," Wanai said. "I can come back later." He made as though to leave, but Vimbai stopped him. "Oh, don't be silly. Come on in and meet my brother." And as she introduced the two, she saw Vivai's face grow even more tense. But no sooner had the two men exchanged toad pleasantries had Vimbai heard the jingles of Shumba's donkeys. The excitement outside grew palpable, and all three of them went outside and watched the charitable acts displayed by Shumba before he stepped into the homestead and gave more gifts to Vimbai and Vimbai's siblings. Then he walked towards the three of them and stopped before them, crouching and cupping his hands towards Vimbai, saying, "Brother-in-law." Then to Vimbai he said, "Oh, beautiful flower that shines in my heart, what a pleasure it is to see you again." He rose and looked the fishmonger and asked him, Doing household deliveries now, eh boy? Nobody responded, and Shumba stood looking over at the fishmonger, then said, "Do they owe you anything for the fish, huh?" He grabbed a small bag of coins from his cloak and said, "Here, take this, and from now on, whatever debt they owe, come to me, I will pay it." But Wanai did not move. Confused, Shumba turned to Zivai and said, "Brother-in-law, is this man a relation of yours? Have I stepped on tradition's feet by speaking wrongly to an uncle or somebody important?" "No," Sivai said, "he is not our relation." "Oh, so who is he?" There was a silence, and Vimbai saw that the people who had come to receive gifts were still standing by the entrance, watching, sensing the potential of hot gossip. "He is my visitor," Vimbai then said quietly. "He came to see me." "Ah," Shumba laughed and appraised the man. "A potential suitor." He turned to Wanai and said, "Oh well, my man, the roof suitor has now arrived. You are welcome to go back to your store or the river or wherever you come back from. Please excuse us." Wanai did not move, and Vimbai, glancing at him, saw a glimpse of fierceness in his eyes, something she had never seen there before. Shumba laughed and turned to Vimbai. "I think you can bid farewell to him now." But Vimbai neither moved nor said a word. A look of incredulity was crossing over Shumba's face, and then he said to her, "Do you want this boy?" Again Vimbai did not say anything, but Wanai had moved closer to Shumba and was saying, "Who are you calling boy?" Shumba laughed and said, "You, of course." It took a split second for both men to clasp their waists and withdraw their spears. Vimbai screamed, "Stop!" and rushed to stand between them. "What are you doing?" she cried out. "Stop it, you fools!" But Shumba was speaking. No, he was saying, "I refuse to be embarrassed in the presence of a poor man. Allow us to fight for your honor, or choose now, right now, in front of this audience, who you want to be with." Vimbai looked at both young men, both handsome, one with security, the other with safety, one with glamour, the other with kindness. She could hear the loud whispers from the excited crowd behind her. "Choose Shumba," people were saying, and a low chant of "Shumba, Shumba, Shumba" was rising. She looked over at her brother, but his eyebrow was cocked. She looked over at her siblings, and her heart broke. She looked again at the two young men, then closed her eyes. She knew what she wanted. So following her brother's advice to follow her heart, she turned to Wanai and said, "I choose you because you have shown me kindness and love and laughter and respect." She felt Shumba's rage before she heard his scream. The young man was now pointing a spear at her. "Betrayer!" he called out. "Deceiver!" But before he could do anything, there was a commotion at the gate, and everyone turned to look. An entourage of donkeys carried several men who waved a foreign royal crest flag in the air. They watched an older man disembark and approach them. When he saw Wanai, the man bowed, then crouched and said, "Your Royal Highness, heir to the Tapa clan," he said, looking at Wanai, "we bring you news from your father, the king. His health is failing, and the oracle says that he has less than a moon to live. Your father has learnt of the work you have put, and word of your growth has reached him. He believes that you have shed off the cloakhood of irresponsibility, and you are now ready to take up your duties in royalty. He says you have to return home as soon as possible, so that your coronation takes place while he is still with us, my prince." The man finished. Every mouth in the crowd was agape. The fishmonger was a prince, as soon to be king, but even at that moment, Shumba was dropping his spear arm, knowing that any move here would start a war with another kingdom. But it was Vimbai who was even more shocked. Never in a million moons would she have believed that Wanai was a prince, not with his humility and with his down-to-earth manner. Wanai was, however, putting the spear in his sheath by his side, and he took 2 steps to close the gap between himself and Vimbai. Taking her face into his palms and looking into her eyes, he said, "Thank you for choosing me, my love. I love you, and I promise to honor you forever. I want to run home now to see my father. Then we will be back with my delegation to sort out your aura. And don't worry about your siblings. We will find a good balance for them so that they don't lose either you or their home. Okay, my love?" But Vimbai was looking at him. "That story of the prince you told me, it was you, right?" He laughed and nodded. "And still you loved me as I was." She smiled and said, "And still I love you as you are." They both smiled, and Wanai said, "Promise me you will wait for me." "I promise," she said, and they both smiled into each other's eyes. The end. Thank you guys for watching to the end of this very long story. If you liked it and like African romance stories, don't forget to watch other stories on this channel, and also don't forget to click on the thumb up button or the subscribe button, or just comment below. Lots of love and take care. Bye.